Hi, and welcome to the Simply Connected podcast, your go-to spot for discovering new connections. On this show, we get real about the power of human connection through genuine, candid conversations. Through these conversations, we explore how human interactions shape our experiences and ultimately help to define our identities. My name is Lauren, and I am so excited that you've landed here with us today. And before we jump in and speak to today's guest, we are going to add another song to the Simply Connected playlist, which you can find on Spotify, and we'll link in the show notes for today's episode. And the song I'm going to be adding to today's playlist is called Nobody's Nobody by Brothers Osborne. And this song actually helped to inspire this podcast and kind of its evolution, in the sense that this song really talks about how we all have a part in people's stories, whether we know it or we don't, and how everyone's story is different and we don't really know the full story of a person. So again, the song is Nobody's Nobody by Brothers Osborne, and that'll be added to the Simply Connected playlist on Spotify for you to check out. In today's episode, we talk with Sylvana, and we talk all things her business, which is mindset coaching. We talk about her love of books, her love of podcasts. We talk about her love of travel, where she feels at peace when she's next to the water. And we talk about her love of networking. If there's one thing Sylvana loves, it's networking, and you are most likely to spot her around town catching up with people. Hey, Sylvana.
Hey, Lauren.
Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the Simply Connected podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you. When you shared this idea, when it was just an idea, I was so excited for what it was going to become. So I'm excited to be sitting in this chair with you.
I feel like it's crazy to think that like what you just said was an idea just a few months ago, and now we're actually rolling it out. It feels insanely surreal. So I'm thrilled that you are on the show, and I'm going to start off with an easy question to me, but not so much for our guests. Just tell us about yourself. Who is Sylvana?
Who is Sylvana? What a question. And a question that's probably evolved. The answer's probably evolved over the years. I'm a mindset coach. And the reason why I start with that is because I'm a lover of people. And I know we're going to dive into all things people and connection and relationships as we dive into this over the next hour or so. But it really, my love for people and my fascination for stories and connection and what makes people tick at the deepest level is what drove me to do what I do for a living. So I spent 10 years in tech sales before branching off, starting my own business, getting into this space. And I would say I'm a dreamer. I think I spent a lot of years checking boxes, and I wouldn't say that I am cured of that, as many of us that know what that feels like would probably also say, but I definitely am an optimist, and I look for the best in people and just love being around people.
I love that. And for our listeners who don't necessarily know what a mindset coach is, tell us a little bit about the work that you do with people.
Yeah, so I work with both companies and individuals in helping people overcome the mindset blocks that are holding them back from whatever it is that they're achieving. A lot of people that I work with, there's this perceived success that they carry in their life, that they've created for themselves. And oftentimes the success that is perceived of them is not necessarily the success that they feel internally for themselves. And after a while, it really starts to create some discomfort internally because they don't know where to turn. And they know that there are these external achievements tied to their names. They've been probably rewarded in certain ways, whether that's a promotion or whatever that is. But internally, there's this lack of fulfillment. And it gets to the point where those whispers start to get louder and they need to do something about it. So we work together mostly in a one-on-one capacity to really dive deep into their minds, into their thoughts, and understand what's going on in there and what are the mindsets and the narratives that we are telling ourselves that might be holding us back from our true potential, or showing up in an authentic way that allows us to equalize the success that we portray and the success that we feel internally.
I love the passion that exudes from you as you talk about this, and I feel like the people that you probably meet and that you probably coach do reach places of vulnerability, and the conversations that you have with them are likely changing their lives and steering them in new directions. So I'm truly in awe of the work that you do and the people who you're helping to set forth into the world. I feel like they come to you when they're at kind of a crossroads, like you said, or at a place of indecision, or a place of wanting that change, and for you to help guide them along this path of change and of growth, and just allowing themselves to go there to those more vulnerable places is a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Yes, it is. It is that exactly. And I always say the more successful, and I'll probably say success in quotes all podcast long, but the more successful you become, the harder it is to be vulnerable, because there's almost this persona that you've created of yourself. And then when you feel the need to be vulnerable, you look around and sometimes you question who am I going to be vulnerable with? And so being that third party that can come in with no bias, with no judgment, with no past history of who this person is, it really allows them a container of that safe space to dive in. And vulnerability is different for everyone. Some people can drop in really quickly. Sometimes it takes a couple of sessions to get comfortable with what that feels like and sit in the emotions and the thoughts that come up. But at the end of the day, the more vulnerable you are in my world, the further you're going to get in terms of growth and evolution towards who you're becoming.
Yeah. And I feel like, too, speaking on the topic of vulnerability, not only do you need that in a coaching atmosphere, but I feel like you also need that in all relationships, whether it's an intimate relationship, whether it's friends, colleague to colleagues. And I think about the time, or I guess when we first met. We met a few years ago now on a yoga retreat in Costa Rica.
We did.
Which, crazy to believe it's already, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago almost?
Yeah.
Something like that. And I remember going on this retreat and kind of the lead up to it. I've always been a solo traveler most of my life, and so signing up for this retreat was not a big deal for me in the sense that I was doing it alone. I knew going into it, I would meet people, I would have a great time. And when I was asking one of the organizers, do I know anyone? Like, is there anyone from the studio that I practice at? Is there anyone coming? She's like, naming names. And I'm like, oh, unfortunately, like I don't know any of them. Maybe we've crossed paths, maybe we haven't, but I'm excited to meet them. And flash forward to a couple months later, I show up at the retreat. You're already there. Your story of arrival is a story that you'll have to share, just because it was such an experience for you to actually make it to the retreat.
Yeah.
But you were there, you were settled in, and you were sitting outside of, I guess, our house. There's 3 houses on this resort where we kind of stayed. And I believe you were reading, or you were journaling or something, and the van that I arrived in with 3 other girls, you immediately got up, and I could feel the warmth of your presence as soon as you walked over to us and introduced yourselves, and we introduced ourselves, and you're just like, oh, you're my first roomie. So we went upstairs and we unpacked, and then I think it was only like 10 minutes into this, we were like, do you want to walk into town? And we walked into town, and I remember on that first walk, we walked into town, we grabbed a smoothie, and we dropped right into vulnerability.
We did.
And we had those more serious conversations that, for me personally, I haven't done very often with a new friend or a new person, and it just felt so safe. So for me to feel that safe in a different country with a brand new person, I can only imagine what it must feel like for your clients coming to you as a coach, to feel that warmth and that acceptance that you exude just naturally out of your persona.
Thank you. That's quite the compliment. I appreciate it.
So you're welcome. I'll say that first. Do you remember when you met me?
I do. Likewise, I heard your name before we showed up, and you were a name around our studio that we go to. And I remember same thing. One of the organizers says, "You must know Lauren. She's the sweetest woman. She's been here for years and years as a karma." And I was like, I don't think I know her. And I think I creeped you on Instagram before, and I'm pretty sure in your bio it says something about NASCAR, and it says something about country music. And my husband's into NASCAR, so I was like, okay, and we're both into country music, so I was like, okay, there's gonna be something to talk about on top of yoga. And I do remember so vividly that first walk into town to get coffee, and you were on the coffee train and I was on the coconut train. Wherever I could track down a coconut, I don't know how many coffees and coconuts we shared together in that week. A lot. More than 7, that's for sure.
More than 7,
More
yes,
the number
absolutely.
of days. And it was exactly right what the organizer had said. There was just this immediate connection that I felt safety, and exactly what you just said to me. I think what we put out is what we look for in others as well. So I think it's interesting the similarities of what we saw in each other without even knowing each other, because there can be a defense that goes up immediately when you also feel if the energy is more closed off. So I think the fact that we were able to dive in so deep and just take our relationship from there really just represented probably the work that we've done in advance of that yoga retreat that we did, but also what we were looking to get out of it, right? I think if you went in with a guard, not you specifically, if anyone went in with a guard and we're only together for 7 days and it takes you a couple days to take that guard down, then you're really only going to be able to establish the relationship so far. But I think trusting that this container, this yoga retreat, was attracting a certain type of person and allowed you to dive in a little bit faster, a little bit deeper, and trust that you were going to be held in that space, allowed for relationship and connection to flourish across a 7-day period, which is really not that long.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. And you said it perfectly. I feel like we were in almost the perfect container for 7 days to really nurture the relationships that we were building. And coming out of those 7 days, I feel like I learned more about you than I would have had I met you maybe naturally in the studio or on the street or at a networking event, something like that. We were so cared for, and we were at the same time nurturing ourselves and our souls and our bodies and our minds, and giving ourselves that space to build those relationships.
Totally. And I know you had a vivid memory of us meeting. My vivid memory was when you were leaving. I was staying a little bit longer and you were leaving. And I remember the two of us went for a walk by ourselves on the beach the morning that you were leaving. And I remember you were in this like pink Lululemon shirt, and we went to the water and we were chatting. And we both basically said, like, this is just the beginning. Like, I know that we were brought into each other's lives at this exact moment for a reason. And we were both optimistic and excited for what that was going to become, knowing that those 7 days rooming together was just the start of something beautiful.
Something extremely beautiful. And I remember that morning on the beach, and I am a firm believer in people get put into your lives for a specific reason when they're needed. And I am forever grateful that we met on that retreat, because we were only going up from here.
There we go. Likewise.
So before we jump into a couple more questions kind of about connection and what connection means to you, why don't you tell me a little bit about the highs and lows that you've been going through recently?
Whew. Okay. Where do we start? Highs or lows?
Let's start with the lows so we can come back with the highs.
Yeah.
The wins.
I love that. Work with the energy. Lows. So I've been going through some health stuff in the last month, which has been a challenge for me and has brought up a lot. I'm still in it, so I'm not going to dive into all the details of what it is. But what I recognize is when life throws you a curveball, as it inevitably does, And as we hear about in the most cliche lines, until it doesn't feel real until it's real and it lands. And then you hear all of those lines playing in your head from all of these different people or movies or books or quotes that you've read, and you're living it. And I have had to sit in the discomfort that it has brought up for me for a while now. What feels like a while. It's only been 6 weeks, but it definitely, time slows down when you're faced with challenges, when you deal with the like dips instead of the highs. I feel like the highs seem to go fast and the lows seem to just slow right down.
It's usually when you're stuck in those lows that you're like, when am I going to see the light? When is it coming?
Exactly.
Whereas when you're in those highs and those peaks, you're just like, I never want it to end.
Yeah, hold on. How can I keep this forever? And it's trusting that everything is temporary. And you hear it. That's one of those lines, right? Things come and go. Life is full of ups and downs. Everything is temporary. You'll get through it. All of these lines that we hear, right? And it's interesting that when you are sitting in it, you recognize the lessons that it is there to teach you. And sometimes it's really hard to see those lessons through the cloudiness at the time. But often if you sit long enough, which is hard, and that's probably one of the hardest parts of what this has been for me, is recognizing I don't sit. Like as you know, I'm a very like energetic, very optimistic, very driven person. I just like to go. Like I said, I'm a dreamer. Like just let's keep going. Let's keep moving. Yeah. So when you're like pulled to a stop and you have to sit in it, it can be super uncomfortable. It can bring up a lot of emotions that you didn't even know existed. It can bring up a lot of thoughts that seem to come out of nowhere. It can bring up a lot of excuses or things from the past. And it's taking what you need, but also not holding on too tight and not identifying with this state, because if you do, and one thing that I made a promise to myself when this all kind of came to be was, you are not to make any big, important decisions until you are out of the other side of this, because I think you do become altered in some way, more from a state perspective. I don't think it's permanent per se, although there are things you're not going to come out the other side the exact same, and that's probably a good thing. But I told myself, this is not you necessarily. So anything that feels drastic, just write it down and come back to it when you're feeling like you've come out of the hole a little bit.
What's that they say about sending emails in anger?
Mm-hmm.
Always sit with it.
Sleep on it.
I feel like that's a pretty well thought out promise you made to yourself.
Yeah, I made that promise a while ago, in business specifically, of, you know, entrepreneurship in itself is a series of ups and downs. And I would say that the ups and downs feel a little less drastic, but I always said, never make a decision in business when you're at the down. If you feel a certain way, write it down. And when you're back up again, revisit it. If you still feel that way, then act if that's what's necessary. If not, you'll be grateful that you didn't make that decision when you were feeling, you know, a little bit shaken.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people can take a lesson from that page or that notebook. Just take a moment, take a breath, step back, evaluate, and then move forward.
Yeah.
Well, all things health considered, I hope things are moving forward in the right direction for you.
Thank you.
But tell me about a win or a high that has come recently.
So a high, I'm about to wrap up a 4-month coaching program with 5 separate individuals from one company. And we've worked together all summer since May. And it's just been such an incredible experience to witness the transformations in each of them. I think I've had clients and I have clients that come in and out at different times, but they have different backgrounds and they have different jobs. And the fact that these 5 people started and ended at the same time, they work for the same company, they have the same job title, but do they have different backgrounds? Of course they have different backgrounds. Do they have different reasons why they're being held back in their jobs or in their lives? Of course they do. So to be able to look at that situation from the outside looking in and just observe how the transformation looks for each of them has been a really incredible experience, and definitely a high that I'm really savoring in the last little bit.
Absolutely. That's amazing. And I would count that as a huge win to see 5 people go through that program and to come out the other side, likely changed people with new vision and new direction and new dreams.
Totally. It's pretty cool.
Wow, I love that. On that note, diving into, I guess, more of the corporate side of things for now, what does it look like for you, or how do you go about building connections in the corporate world?
Good question. In terms of colleagues, internal, external.
I guess it could be either or. It could be. Let's go with a 2-part question, because I know you came from the corporate world.
I did.
So when you think back to those days, how did you, Sylvana, go about building connections with your colleagues, your peers, your boss? And then on the flip side, now that you're your own boss, you're an entrepreneur, how do you go about building connections with people in the corporate world to get as clients?
So first off, I would say I'm a trust first type of person. Some people would say that's good. Some people would say that's bad. Irrelevant. That's kind of who I am. So I think every time I enter into a situation, anytime I enter into a room, there's just like an immediate trust that I'm going to go in with, and then I'll evaluate afterwards. And my energy follows that. I think I have a very open energy, and have for a while, in the sense that when I do walk into the room, people are attracted to me. Like, it's just there is a little bit of a natural pull, which I'm fortunate to have. I think there's some confidence there as well. I think I have been fortunate to have built confidence at a young age and continue to do so, because it's not a personality trait. It's definitely a skill. But I think I was able to establish that before I entered the workforce. So as I walked into those rooms, I was able to keep my head held high. I was able to have this open energy. I wanted to trust people. Like, I like people. That's how I started this, right? I have a genuine curiosity about people. I want to get to know people. I want to build that connection. I crave that connection. And so I think just putting myself out there from the very beginning, when I think back to my very first job in a different city than my hometown, was super important. And then I think it's finding your people. And that vulnerability comes in right away, is what are you going to share so that they share back, right? Like, vulnerability is not necessarily one-sided. It typically doesn't work that way in a relationship, especially. So I think when you share, you're creating space and almost giving people permission to share. And I'm not saying that we're getting into the deepest and darkest things when you're colleagues, but it's even just talking about work. We're talking about the parts of your personal life that you do end up sharing. So I think it comes from you first. And I always say, the more you can develop your own self-awareness, the easier it is going to be to find connection and build relationships. And I think I knew that probably inadvertently at a young age, and that helped me early on in corporate.
Mm-hmm. And I can say firsthand from watching you network, because we've been to a couple events together. You do kind of exude that confidence, and it's a trait that I am quick to notice in other people. And I think it's an extremely positive trait, being able to walk into a room, be sure of yourself, whether you are or you aren't. It's great to be able to portray that. And I think watching the people that you interact with, it's it's reciprocated. You do have that energy where people are attracted to you. They want to know more. They want to get to know you as a person. And I would agree. I think in both the corporate world, whether you are a leader or a boss, a manager, anything like that, or just a colleague, an employee on the front line, I think building that connection and being confident in yourself and the skills and the abilities that you have in the workplace goes a long way in kind of solidifying those relationships.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so now that we know kind of how you go about building those connections, what does connection look like to you? How does it make you feel?
That's an interesting question because let me think on this for a second. I personally think that you can have a connection with someone that you don't necessarily know. So I think connection is just such a deep term, and I think it's different than relationship, because you can't have a relationship with someone that you don't know, but I think you can have a connection with someone that you don't know. And those connections specifically are magic to me. When I can move through the world and I seek out these connections with a small exchange with the barista at a coffee shop, or with someone at the grocery store, or someone, I'm the person that will talk to you if you're sitting beside me on an airplane. I'm sorry.
Not gonna lie, I'm learning to love it, but that's kind of my worst nightmare.
You're not the only one. You're definitely not the only one.
I'm like, quick, put your headphones on before the plane takes off.
Before they ask you anything. Because once you give some information, then there's no turning back.
Yeah.
And hopefully you're not going to Asia, because it's going to be a long flight. So yeah, I really think that connection is something that you share with someone else. Sometimes you can just meet them. Sometimes it can be that like medium stay, which is like what we were talking about in Costa Rica on our yoga retreat. And then other times it's the connection that you have with the people that are closest to you. But I think there has to be something shared, whether it's emotional, whether it's an experience, whether it is love would fall under the emotion. Something has to be shared. And the feeling is so visceral to me, because I know when my interaction with the barista, as the example, is a connection and when it's just an interaction. And those two things are very, very different. And the biggest difference is the sensation within my body that tells me, yeah, that was something. There was like a little moment there, right? And I think it's energy surge. I think it's warmth. I think it's faith, like trust, like trusting that like people are good, you know? Yeah, it's definitely a feeling.
And I think you nailed, what is the saying that hit the nail on the head?
Right.
In terms of your definition of what connection is, because the whole essence of the Simply Connected podcast is that we can find connection anywhere, whether it's connection with a friend, a spouse, a colleague, connection to self, connection to a passion project. Connection is there. And it's, I love that you said that there's a difference between connection and an interaction. There is, but I feel like when there is a connection, you just know. It's like a visceral feeling.
Totally.
So I love that you touched on kind of the barista example and how you, if you're grabbing a coffee, how you're able to notice kind of a connection or an interaction in that sense. Can you tell us about a moment where you felt a connection with someone, whether it was on kind of a deep personal level? I guess, yeah, let's go with the deep personal level, because I feel like you can have that connection in all sense of the word with anyone. But is there a moment that comes to mind in your life where you're just like, yeah, I knew that was a connection?
I'll talk about one that developed into a friendship. And I'm going to take us back to Costa Rica. And it was the year before you and I met. And I was there to do my yoga teacher training on my own, a solo trip like you shared earlier. And one evening, very early on, I was there for 7 weeks, and it was probably night 3. and I went out for dinner with a group of people from the hotel hostel that I was staying with. And halfway through dinner, this woman shows up and sits at the end of the table. And she was also staying at our hostel, but I hadn't met her yet. And I just felt her energy. I just felt it. And there was something slow motion about her showing up to the table. And I can vividly see it right now as I think back to this moment. And we were sharing, like, where are we from? And she was also from Canada. She was from Montreal. And she was also on a solo trip. And she was in the town that we were in, but she was planning to leave the next day or 2 days later to explore another part of the country. And we were just chatting a little bit, and nothing happened that night other than this like feeling that I sensed off of her, this energy. And the next morning I saw her outside of her room on her computer, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she said, "I'm changing my plans. I'm going to do my yoga teacher training with you and your group and the group." I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, "Yeah, I heard you talking last night and it hit me that this is what I need to do in this moment. So I'm changing my plans. I'm actually staying here and I'm going to do the yoga training." And I was like, wow, okay. She's like, "There's just one problem. I have nowhere to stay tonight. Can I stay with you?" And I thought, yes. Yeah, of course you could stay with me. And so that night we shared a room together. We shared a bed together. And from that moment on, we became super close in our 3-week training. I went through quite an experience during that training that she was there for. And as we came home, we brought that relationship back to Canada with us. And so it really makes me think of connection and relationship, because in that moment that she arrived at that picnic table and just shared her energy and shared who she was with the group, that was when the connection was made. That's when that visceral feeling took place. And then from there, the relationship built, which I think is pretty cool.
That's amazing. Talk about Costa Rica, like just bringing people together.
I know.
Wow. And you're still obviously friends with this person?
Yeah. We still are connected and friends and
Wow, I love that. Is there someone who you've crossed paths with in your life who has left a lasting impression on you, whether they know it or they don't? Like an old teacher, an old colleague, an old mentor. Is there someone out there who you can think of or that comes to mind where you are just like, yeah, they did it for me. They changed it for me. Did they say something to you? Did they help you with something? Is there a person out there?
Yes, there are many, but my 2 most prominent bosses are the names that came to mind as you were asking this question. So I shared that I was in tech sales for 10 years before starting my own business. And I was only at 2 companies. And my first company I joined when I was 22 years old. It was a startup cybersecurity company that was just about to take off. And my boss was an incredible mentor for me and did so much for me that I'll never truly know the impact on my life that he made, and he'll never fully, like, both of us, it's one of those things that it just like exists, and he knows that he's influenced me, and obviously I know that he's influenced me, but I don't think either of us know to the degree, because that's the thing with influence. When it does change the trajectory, sometimes I wish I was like in those movies where you could play it back and say, like, what if I didn't meet this person? Like, what would life have looked like? And Bill is one of those people that I know if I didn't meet him, my life would have looked different. And it came all the way down to just how he interacted and respected and celebrated me early on, to taking me under his wing as a mentor. And yeah, there's a lot there, but he's definitely one of them. And when I did move on, he actually moved on before I did. But when I did move on, I landed at another company that wasn't where I thought I would have ended up. Like, all of my mentors were telling me, Sylvana, you've had the startup experience. You've had the small company experience that grew and took off. Go somewhere big. Go to a Microsoft, go to an SAP, get the big corporate experience just to round it out. And so I tried. I was interviewing. I had some offers. I had some rejections, but nothing stuck. And then when I met what ended up being the CEO of the company I joined, again, there was that connection in the first interview. And I remember saying, like, I don't even really know what this company does, but I know I want to be part of whatever this man is doing. And so I went against the advice and I followed my gut and I followed that visceral connection because I knew that it had served me in the past. And I joined this company of 8 people at the time, selling into the federal government, which is absolutely something I did not want to do. And he once again was just this solid leader that I needed at that stage of my career, and supported me and celebrated me, all the same terms, but very different characters, which is also interesting, and encouraged me. And I know that I wouldn't be where I am today, or I wouldn't be. He again built a few extra blocks in my confidence on my way out the door. So would I be doing what I'm doing? Maybe. Would I be as confident doing what I'm doing? Probably not.
Yeah. And I think too, when you mention kind of the movies and having the ability to go back and replay and question what your life would look like had these people maybe not entered your life when you needed them or for a specific reason. And the more I dive deep into these conversations, the more it hits me that there are so many people in our lives that we get to cross paths with. And the impact that they leave, whether lasting or not, just goes to show how important connection is. And it could be mentors like Bill and the people that you talk about, or the barista who just gives you a smile. And it's those moments that you remember. And I saw recently, I don't know where I saw it. Maybe it was a quote, probably Instagram somewhere, but I've come across it a few times, and I'm going to completely butcher what it is, but it says that your name is written down in someone's journal as a positive. So knowing that you or I or whoever have had the ability to brighten someone's day, to give them that memory, to be a sparkle in their journal, just reminds me how big of a responsibility it is to be a good human being, to be kind, to be caring, to be loyal, and to just nurture the people around you.
Yeah, chills on that one for sure. I have not come across that quote, but I love it so much, and I believe that it's so true. And you have no idea who's looking up to you. You have no idea, but we all have someone that's looking up to us. And like you said, it is a responsibility, and it shouldn't come as a weight. It should come as exciting. Like someone is looking up to you, and that just gives you this permission and this ability to just live and be authentic and be the best version of yourself. Yeah. Because the ripple effect is much greater than just you.
You owe it to yourself as much as the people around you to be you, because that's what people love. Mm-hmm. So on that note, how do you go about nurturing the connections and the relationships that you have in your life?
That's a good question. And I knew that this topic, obviously I knew connection was the topic of this podcast. And as I was contemplating and just thinking a little bit of, what is connection to me, I realized how much in the last 2 years I've spent more time making new connections than nurturing my existing connections, which is very interesting. So I would say that, my focus recently, I have brought a bunch of new people into my life in all realms. I think there's some core people, there's some friends, and then there's a lot of acquaintances that kind of have come just purely through the business that I'm doing now, and the way that I put myself out there because of this business and this brand. But when it comes to maintaining and growing the existing connections and what I would end up saying are relationships, I think, just like I said at the very beginning of how you have to do the work first, I still believe that so deeply, that I have and continue to do a lot of personal growth work and understand, like, who am I? How am I showing up in this relationship? What are my values? What are the shared values that we have between me and the other person, or between me and this person? Because it's not always going to be the same. Obviously, we know, especially when it comes to family, that your family isn't chosen. So they are the way that they are. Our friends, we can maybe curate that a little bit more, but at the end of the day, they are who they are as well, and they have those different backgrounds, and they're going to have different values even though you have chosen them. And it's understanding, how do we interact? I think communication is huge. One of just like communicating, like, let's check in on each other. Let's make sure that we're actually in communication. And I think there's a lot of praise for the relationships that, like, oh, I love this person because we don't have to talk for a full year, and then we just pick back up right where we left off. And I get where that is coming from, because I think there's a lot of unspoken expectations that exist in some relationships that cause people stress and feel like it becomes high maintenance. So people are craving that low maintenance. But I also want to challenge it and say, relationships are not easy, and they shouldn't be. And like, yes, there are going to be people in your life that you don't see for a year and you pick back up again. But are those your core people? Are those the people closest to you? And do you have a responsibility of not letting that happen? And maybe it's a long distance relationship. Maybe there's something or a reason why. But with technology these days, there's not really an excuse for not sending that quick morning text. Hey, thinking of you, popped into my mind, thinking of you, have a great day. Or like, what have you been up to? A quick interaction. It doesn't need to be, I'm flying out to Vancouver to visit you. But I think there is an obligation, for lack of a better word, to maintain relationships through that communication. And then above and beyond that is, how are you sharing? What are you talking about? Is there a reciprocal? Yeah, reciprocal nature here. I've heard a lot about, friends at this age where people are like, I'm realizing that this is very one-sided. I sit down with one of my friends and they're talking all about them, and they don't never ask about me. And so adult friendships has actually been a conversation that has come up a lot in groups that I've been, dinner parties that I've been at, like cottage weekends that I've been at, of people that are between 28 and 38, let's say, that are navigating what is adult friendship and what is required of me and what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, and what does it look like to let a relationship fizzle out, and what does it look like to have that tough conversation and have a little bit of a breakup if necessary as well. So I think when it comes down to it, communication is key, and understanding yourself and having compassion for others as well.
Yeah, and I think communication in all sense of the word is huge, not only in connections, but in life in general. And I feel like as adults trying to navigate these friendships and these relationships, it is trying to find that balance, because referencing the 28 to 38 age range that you mentioned, we're all in different life stages. Whether that's family, whether that's work, whether that's priorities, whether that's goals, we're all in different stages of moving forward. So being able to accept the stage you're in, but also accept the stages that your friends are in, and understanding what that looks like to you and whether or not it fits into what relationships and connection looks like in your world. Because you want to be able to show up for yourself and nurture yourself and have those boundaries, but you also want to be able to authentically show up for those people who are in your life, who you're trying to support.
Yes, well said.
How has how has social media, being an entrepreneur, how has social media kind of elevated or hindered your approach to building connections online?
So social media is an interesting one, as we all know, and I think it gets a bad rap these days. But I want to start on the positive side and say, and this is only because I'm in business, because I wouldn't say that this has been brought about through my personal Instagram page in any way. But I have built a lot of connections through social media, through Instagram. And I try hard to, when it makes sense, take those relationships, the ones that make sense, off of Instagram and then meet in person or have a conversation. And sometimes that can get a lot, and I'm starting to like explore what is boundaries and access, because you can't have coffees with everyone and you can't have Zoom chats with everyone. And I'm realizing that the hard way over the summer, let's say. But I think it's incredible that social media is a tool to bring people together. And when you put yourself out authentically, and authenticity is a word that we've used so many times in this conversation already, but I think when you put yourself out authentically, you're going to attract similar people to you. And what a beautiful thing, because like you shared earlier, if you didn't find them on the internet, were you ever going to find them? And if the conversation or the relationship or the connection never leaves the internet, that's okay too. Because there's something. And it's interesting now that I say connection, that's what it is. It's you're connecting with someone, and that is interesting in it. Even just looking at what does that definition of connection mean, because it's very different than that visceral feeling that we were talking about earlier in this conversation. There is absolutely no visceral feeling when I click to follow someone or connect with someone on LinkedIn, but you're building something.
Yeah, I feel like it's easy to hide on social media. It's easy to maybe not present yourself as authentically as you could or you'd want to, but I think, yeah, when you are following or when you are liking or interacting with people's posts, I think it is building a foundation of something in order to move that relationship forward.
Totally.
So for those listening, if our listeners wanted to connect with you, where can they find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at Sylvana Gatto Coaching. I'm also on LinkedIn, Sylvana Gatto. And my website is sylvanagatto.com. So very easy to find me, SylvanaGatto. And that's where I hang out when I'm online.
Perfect. Well, we will make sure to connect or put all those connections into the show notes for everyone to go and follow you, go and find you, go and connect with you. I swear I'm going to break a record on this show with how many times I say the word connect or connection.
Totally.
So we're just going to count them out. But let's give our listeners a few more Sylvana tidbits before they go. Let's say, what was the last movie or TV show you watched? I know you're not a big TV person, but what was the last thing you watched?
You're right, I'm not. But I'm rewatching Gossip Girl right now after 10, 12 years, and it feels so good.
Okay, bring back that nostalgia.
Yeah.
And what was the last book you read or podcast that you listened to?
Ooh. So I always have a nonfiction book and a fiction book on the go. The last nonfiction, funny enough, was Closer Together by Sophie Gregoire Trudeau. Works perfectly. You should get her in this seat. Yeah. And Carly Fortune is a Canadian author who has wrote 3 books placed or situated in Canada. And they're just like fun summer reads that I enjoyed reading this summer. And podcasts, I'm always listening to podcasts. I actually watched a 4-hour podcast last week.
Oh my gosh.
Split up across the whole week on Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. And that's my go-to for the last while now, probably a year.
Okay. 4 hours, that's a commitment.
It's a commitment, but it took me through the week.
Love it. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
To fly.
To fly?
Yeah, I love to travel. So it would just be so convenient if I could fly wherever I wanted to go.
Like fly real time or like fly like almost like teleportation, like just zap yourself there?
Sure. Yeah,
Either
might
or,
as well. Why would I waste time?
Right? Just want to get there.
Yeah. Okay, scratch that. Teleportation.
I just changed your superpower for you.
Thank you.
What piece of advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, such a good question. Don't rush to grow up. Like, adult years are way longer than youth. And I think I was so focused on becoming an adult and checking the like adult boxes. And then I got there and was like, why did I rush to do this? So
Yeah. I think coming out of those teen years, everyone's like, I can't wait to be in my 20s. I can't wait to be an adult. But
right.
I would agree. Don't rush. Don't rush those years. They're prime. They're where you build those core memories.
Totally.
Okay, and then finally, because on this show, we have a Simply Connected podcast that our listeners can find on Spotify. And again, we'll link that in the show notes later. But what song is currently playing on repeat, or what is your favorite go-to song when you just need a mood boost? And we are going to add this song to the playlist for our listeners.
Okay, so I shared I like country music at the beginning of the episode. The song Soul by Lee Bryce. Every time it comes on, it gets me every time.
Love it. I know exactly what song you're talking about. So we will go and add that song to the playlist.
Amazing.
But thank you so much for being here today. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I can't wait to take this offline and chat more.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.